I am Aria Mitchell, 27 years old, with legs that only partially work since I was 8. My mobility walker sank into the soft earth as my mother Regina walked away, leaving me stranded deep in the Colorado woods. The autumn wind cut through my light jacket as her final words echoed in my head. "You were dead to me the day you ruined my life." I watched her silver sedan disappear between the trees, never looking back. What neither of us realized was that someone else had been watching the entire time. Before I tell you how I survived being abandoned by my own mother, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more stories of survival against impossible odds. Growing up in suburban Colorado with my single mother, Regina, wasn't always terrible. Before the accident, I remember moments of genuine happiness. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver. My mother worked as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company, and while money was tight, we managed. I was an active child who loved running through sprinklers in summer and building snowmen in winter. My world changed forever when I was 8 years old. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when another driver ran a red light and slammed into the passenger side of our car where I was sitting. The impact crushed my lower body, causing severe damage to my spinal cord. I spent 6 months in the hospital undergoing multiple surgeries. The doctors eventually told us I would never fully regain function in my legs. I would walk again, but only with assistance, and the nerve damage meant I would experience chronic pain for the rest of my life. At first, my mother was my biggest advocate. She fought with insurance companies, researched experimental treatments, and transported me to countless physical therapy appointments. But as months turned into years, something changed in her. What began as understandable exhaustion evolved into bitter resentment. "I gave up everything for you" became her constant refrain, even when I was too young to understand what she meant. As I grew older, I began to notice how my mother used my disability when it served her purposes. She joined support groups for parents of disabled children, not to learn how to help me, but to absorb the sympathy and attention. She would exaggerate my limitations when describing them to others, painting herself as a martyr. "You have no idea how hard it is," she would tell neighbors, coworkers, and even cashiers at the grocery store. "I do everything for her. My whole life revolves around Aria's needs." The reality was much different at home. By the time I was 12, I was expected to manage most of my own care. I learned to cook from a kitchen chair, do laundry by dragging baskets across the floor, and get myself ready for school despite the pain and difficulty. If I asked for help, my mother would sigh dramatically, or snap. "Figure it out yourself. I have enough to deal with." School was another battlefield. I fought for accommodations while my mother simultaneously demanded special treatment and complained about the hassle of my education. Teachers and administrators were confused by her contradictory behavior. She wanted recognition for her struggles without actually having to support mine. Despite these challenges, I excelled academically. Books and learning became my escape. When I was 16, I proposed taking online classes to finish high school early. And then what my mother scoffed. "College. Who would take care of you? Who would pay for it? You think scholarships cover personal care assistance?" I researched options anyway, discovering programs specifically designed for students with disabilities. When I showed her the information, she tore up the brochures. "Stop living in a fantasy world," she said. "You need to be realistic about your limitations." Still, I persisted. I graduated high school with honors and secretly applied for online college programs. When acceptance letters arrived, my mother opened them first and confronted me. "So this is how you thank me? By planning to abandon me after everything I've sacrificed." The irony of her accusation would only become clear years later. I enrolled anyway in an online program for web design and digital marketing. My mother responded by becoming even more controlling. She managed my disability benefits, giving me only a small allowance while claiming the rest was needed for household expenses. She monitored my phone calls, scrutinized my few friendships, and created obstacles whenever I tried to build connections outside our home. There was Jackson from my online study group who wanted to meet for coffee. My mother accidentally unplugged my wheelchair charger the night before, leaving me unable to leave the house. Then Mariah, a neighbor who offered to drive me to an adaptive yoga class. My mother told her I was too sick to participate and not to come by again. I graduated with my bachelor's degree at 23, hoping a remote job would be my ticket to independence. I secured an interview with a marketing firm that specialized in accessibility. The morning of my video interview, our internet mysteriously went out. When the company offered to reschedule, my mother answered the email claiming I was no longer interested. The cycle continued for several more years. Each of my attempts at independence was systematically dismantled. My mother had constructed a narrative where I was helpless without her, and she worked tirelessly to make that fiction a reality. The week before the abandonment, everything escalated. Regina lost her job. After 15 years with the same company, she was let go due to budget cuts. She came home livid, throwing her purse across the room. "This is your fault," she screamed. "If I didn't have to leave early for your doctor appointments, if I didn't have to take time off for your emergencies, they would have kept me." The fact that I hadn't had a medical emergency in years and that my doctor appointments were scheduled months in advance meant nothing in the face of her rage. For the next 5 days, she alternated between seething silence and explosive outbursts. She made phone calls behind closed doors and spent hours on her computer deleting the browser history afterward. I had no idea she was planning my disposal, researching remote locations, and calculating how to rid herself of what she had come to see as her greatest burden. The morning started strangely calm. I woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes, something my mother hadn't made in years. She was humming in the kitchen when I maneuvered myself to the table using my walker. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I was thinking we should take a little trip today." I stared at her, confused by the sudden change in mood. "A trip where?" "There is this healing retreat in the mountains," she explained, sliding a plate of pancakes toward me. "I read about it online. It is supposed to be beautiful, peaceful, just what we both need after everything." Something felt off, but I wanted to believe this was genuine. Maybe losing her job had given her perspective. Maybe she was finally seeing me as a person rather than a burden. "Is it accessible?" I asked cautiously. "For my walker and everything." "Of course," she assured me. "They have cabins specially designed for people with mobility issues. Wooden ramps, wider doorways, all of that." The name of this supposed retreat was never mentioned, but I didn't notice that red flag at the time. I was too surprised by the prospect of going somewhere anywhere after being essentially homebound for months. "Pack for 2 days," she instructed. "Casual clothes, your medications, and maybe a book. The place encourages disconnecting from technology, so the cell reception might be spotty." I packed a small duffel bag with essentials. 2 changes of clothes, my daily medications for nerve pain, a paperback novel, a water bottle, and a light jacket. It was early September, and while the days were still warm, mountain evenings could get chilly. We left around 10 in the morning. My mother was unusually chatty during the drive, talking about random news stories and pointing out scenery as we traveled west from Denver into the mountains. I noticed she kept checking the rearview mirror as if ensuring we weren't being followed. After about 2 hours of driving, the paved roads gave way to gravel and then to dirt. The smooth ride became bumpy, jostling my sensitive nerves and causing pain to flare up my legs. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, massaging my thigh. "The website said it was secluded," she replied tersely. "No pain, no gain, right?" Another hour passed. We hadn't seen another car or building for miles. The forest grew thicker around us, tall pines blocking much of the sunlight. My mother turned onto an even narrower dirt path that barely qualified as a road. "Mom, I really do not think this is right," I said, anxiety building in my chest. "Can you check the directions again?" "We are almost there," she snapped, all pretense of cheerfulness gone. "Stop complaining." Finally, she pulled over at a small clearing beside a scenic overlook. Mountains stretched into the distance, a truly breathtaking view that under other circumstances might have been enjoyable. "We need to walk a little way to the main area," she said, getting out and coming around to my side of the car. I looked around, seeing no buildings or signs of human presence anywhere. "I do not see anything that looks like a retreat." "It is through those trees," she pointed vaguely. "Very exclusive, very private." She helped me out of the car and handed me my walker. The ground was uneven, covered with pine needles and small rocks that made using the walker challenging. Still, I followed her as she led me away from the car and deeper into a clearing about 200 yards from the road. When we reached the center of the clearing, she put down my duffel bag. Wait here. I need to get something from the car. That was when the first real stab of fear hit me. Mom, this does not feel right. There is no retreat here, is there? She turned back, her face transformed by an expression I had never seen before. It was cold, calculated, almost peaceful. No, Arya, there is no retreat. Then why are we here? My voice sounded small even to my own ears. This is what you wanted, is not it? Independence, freedom from me. Well, now you are going to get it. I gripped my walker tighter. What are you talking about? I am done, she said simply. 20 years of my life sacrificed for you. My career stunted. My relationships ruined. All because of your neediness, your constant demands. Mom, please, whatever this is, we can talk about it. Let us just go back to the car. She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the clearing. There is nothing to talk about. I found a permanent solution. Before I could respond, she lunged forward and grabbed my phone from my jacket pocket. With one swift motion, she hurled it deep into the underbrush at the edge of the clearing. No, I cried, instinctively trying to move toward where the phone had disappeared, but the uneven ground made it impossible with my walker. I paid off the mortgage last week, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Cleaned out our joint account. By the time anyone notices you are missing, I will be in another state, another life. Panic rose in my throat. You cannot leave me here. I will not survive. That is not my problem anymore. She began walking backward toward the car. You were dead to me the moment you ruined my life. I have just been taking care of a ghost all these years. I screamed her name, begged her to reconsider, promised anything and everything if she would just help me back to the car. She never broke stride, never showed a moment of hesitation or regret. The last thing I heard was the car door slamming, the engine starting, and the crunch of tires on dirt and gravel. Then silence except for the wind through the trees and the sound of my own desperate sobbing. My mother had calculated everything perfectly. No witnesses, no chance of immediate rescue. No way for me to easily return to the road with my limited mobility. She had left me to die alone in the woods and driven away without looking back. What she did not know was that someone had been watching the entire terrible scene unfold. Someone with a camera hidden among the trees who had documented every moment of her calculated cruelty. The moment I realized my mother was truly gone, truly not coming back, I collapsed. My legs gave out, and I fell beside my walker, scraping my palms on the rocky ground. A scream tore from my throat, raw and primal. Then another, and another. I screamed until my voice broke, calling her name, begging the empty forest to bring her back. Please, I cannot do this. I cannot be out here alone. Panic overwhelmed me, constricting my chest and making it hard to breathe. The world narrowed to a pinpoint as I hyperventilated, my body shaking uncontrollably. I am not sure how long I stayed like that time, becoming meaningless in the grip of terror. Eventually, the physical symptoms of panic began to subside, replaced by a hollow numbness. My mind refused to accept what had happened, creating scenarios where this was all a test, a cruel lesson my mother wanted to teach me. She would return in an hour, having made her point about how dependent I was on her. I stared at the place where the car had disappeared, willing it to reappear. 1 hour passed, then 2. The sun shifted position in the sky. My phone. I needed to find my phone. I looked toward the dense underbrush where my mother had thrown it. From my position, it seemed impossibly far away. Maybe 30 feet across uneven ground covered with rocks, roots, and fallen branches. For someone with full mobility, it would be nothing. For me, it might as well have been miles. Still, I had to try. I dragged myself toward my walker, pulled myself up, and attempted to navigate the rough terrain. The walker's legs kept sinking into soft earth or getting caught on exposed roots. After 10 excruciating minutes, I had moved perhaps 5 feet. I changed tactics, lowering myself to the ground and trying to crawl. The pain was immediate and intense. Every movement sent jolts of agony through my partially paralyzed legs. Crawling put pressure on nerves that couldn't handle it, making me cry out with each forward motion. After another 15 minutes of this torture, I had only managed another few feet and was drenched in sweat despite the cool air. The reality of my situation became brutally clear. I would not reach my phone. The walker that served me adequately on flat, even surfaces was useless in this environment. And my body, with its limited capabilities, simply could not overcome the challenges of the forest floor. As this realization sank in, I noticed the temperature dropping. The afternoon sun no longer provided warmth, and shadows lengthened across the clearing. I would need to survive a night in the wilderness, and I was woefully unprepared. I took inventory of what I had. My mother had left my duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, my medication, a paperback novel, and a water bottle that was about 3/4 full. I was wearing jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a light jacket. My walker, though, limited in this environment, could potentially be used as a frame for some kind of shelter. The first priority was finding a place to spend the night. The clearing offered no protection from wind or wildlife. I needed to get closer to the tree line where there might be more shelter. Using my walker for support, I began the painfully slow journey toward the edge of the clearing. Each step was a battle against pain and the limitations of my body. What would have taken a fully mobile person 2 minutes took me nearly 45. By the time I reached the first large pine tree, the sun was noticeably lower and my body was screaming with exhaustion. The ground beneath the pine was covered with a thick layer of needles softer than the rocky clearing. I maneuvered myself down, leaning against the trunk. The effort left me breathless and lightheaded. I took a small sip of water, knowing I needed to conserve it. As I sat there catching my breath, memories flooded back. This was not the first time my mother had threatened abandonment. When I was 12, after a particularly difficult doctor's appointment where I had cried during a painful procedure, she had driven halfway home in complete silence before pulling over. "If you cannot be grateful for everything I do for you, maybe you should find someone else to take care of you," she had said, unlocking the doors. "Go ahead, get out. See how far you get on your own." I had sobbed, apologized, promised to be better. She had driven us home eventually, but the message was clear: my continued care was conditional on my compliance and gratitude. There had been other incidents over the years: threats to send me to a home when I asked for help too often, comments about how easy it would be to just walk away when I expressed any desire for independence. I had always believed they were just cruel words spoken in anger. I never imagined she would actually follow through. The sky darkened rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The temperature dropped further, and I shivered inside my inadequate jacket. Night sounds emerged from the forest: the rustling of small animals, the call of an owl, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Sounds that might have been peaceful under different circumstances now seemed menacing. I tried to think practically. I needed to conserve body heat. I opened my duffel bag and pulled out the extra clothes, layering them over what I was wearing. I arranged pine needles around my legs and lower body, creating a crude, insulating layer. I positioned my walker on its side to break the wind coming from the west. These small actions gave me purpose, temporarily distracting me from the enormity of my situation. But as full darkness descended, bringing with it a profound, absolute blackness I had never experienced in the city, despair crept back in. I was alone in the wilderness with limited mobility, minimal supplies, and no means of communication. No one knew where I was. No one would be looking for me, at least, not immediately. My mother had planned her actions carefully, choosing a remote location far from potential witnesses or help. The night stretched endlessly. I drifted in and out of restless sleep, startled awake by unfamiliar sounds or bursts of pain from my awkward position. The cold seeped into my bones despite my layers and makeshift insulation. By morning, I was shivering uncontrollably, my lips cracked from dehydration, my body stiff and aching. As the first gray light filtered through the trees, I faced the stark reality that unless something changed dramatically, I would not survive much longer in these conditions. The water would run out, exposure would weaken me, and eventually my body would simply give up. What I did not know was that help was much closer than I imagined, watching my struggle and preparing to intervene. Jackson Reed had been in these woods for 3 days before I arrived. A wildlife photographer specializing in birds of prey, he had set up a blind about 200 yards from the clearing, hoping to capture images of the golden eagles that nested in the area. His camping gear, food supplies, and satellite phone were all hidden within his carefully constructed blind, designed to blend perfectly with the surrounding forest. He had been changing his camera lens when he heard a car approaching. Curious about visitors in such a remote location, he had trained his telephoto lens on the clearing, intending to simply document whoever was disturbing his shoot. What he witnessed, instead, was a crime unfolding in real time. Through his professional-grade camera, Jackson captured everything: my mother helping me from the car leading me to the middle of the clearing, our heated conversation, her throwing my phone, and finally her driving away, abandoning me. The powerful zoom lens caught every expression on her face, from false concern to cold calculation to final indifference. His first instinct was to run immediately to my aid. A former paramedic before pursuing photography full-time, Jackson was trained to respond to emergencies. But several factors made him hesitate. First, he worried that suddenly emerging from the trees might terrify me further after such a traumatic experience. Second, he knew that documenting the abandonment might be crucial for any future legal proceedings. And third, he wanted to observe my condition from a distance first, to better assess what help I would need. So he stayed hidden, continuing to photograph, as I panicked, struggled to reach my phone, and eventually made my way to the edge of the clearing. He watched my efforts to create shelter for the night, my conservation of water, my resourcefulness, despite overwhelming odds. Jackson had grown up with a younger sister who used a wheelchair. He recognized the modified walker I used and understood some of the challenges I faced. His sister Maya had faced discrimination and accessibility issues throughout her life, making Jackson particularly sensitive to the unique vulnerability of my situation. As night fell, Jackson wrestled with his decision. He had a satellite phone and could call for emergency rescue, but given the remote location, help would take hours to arrive. If he approached me directly, he risked causing further trauma to someone already in distress. He decided to wait until morning, monitoring my condition from a distance and ready to intervene if I showed signs of serious medical distress. He barely slept that night, checking regularly through his night vision equipment to ensure I was still breathing, still fighting. What he observed was a woman with extraordinary resilience making the best of an impossible situation. By morning, however, Jackson could see my condition deteriorating. I was shivering violently, my movements becoming sluggish, signs of dehydration evident in my cracked lips and disoriented behavior. He knew it was time to act. Gathering some supplies from his camp, including water, energy bars, and a thermal blanket, Jackson carefully planned his approach. He needed to appear as non-threatening as possible to someone who had just experienced profound betrayal. He emerged from the trees at the far end of the clearing, making noise intentionally so I would hear him coming. He carried his camera prominently, hoping it would identify him as a photographer rather than a threat. When I first saw movement at the edge of the clearing, terror gripped me. After hours alone, believing no one would find me, the sudden appearance of a stranger triggered both hope and fear. Was this help or new danger? "Hello," he called from a distance, waving one arm slowly. "I am a photographer. I saw what happened. I am here to help if you will let me." I stared at him, unable to process this new development. "Who are you? How long have you been here?" Jackson stopped about 20 feet away, crouching down to appear less intimidating. "My name is Jackson Reed. I have been photographing eagles in these woods for the past 3 days. I saw what happened yesterday with the woman who left you here." "My mother," I said flatly, the words burning like acid. "That was my mother." Jackson's expression reflected shock despite having witnessed the scene. Hearing me confirm our relationship made the abandonment even more horrific. "I have water, food, and a satellite phone," he said, holding up these items one by one. "May I come closer to give them to you?" I nodded cautiously, still not fully trusting but desperate for help. As Jackson approached, he moved slowly, narrating his actions. "I am going to set this water bottle next to you. Here are some energy bars. The thermal blanket will help with your body temperature." As he handed me the water, our fingers briefly touched. His were warm, mine ice cold. I drank greedily, the relief immediate and overwhelming. "Why did you wait until now to help me?" I asked between sips, a hint of accusation in my voice. Jackson sat down on the ground, maintaining some distance. "I needed to document what happened for evidence, and honestly, I was afraid of scaring you more. A strange man appearing suddenly in the woods right after what you experienced. I thought it might cause more trauma." He hesitated, then added, "I also have photographs of everything. Your mother abandoning you, evidence of what she did." My hands trembled around the water bottle. "You have proof?" Jackson nodded, turning his camera so I could see the display screen. He scrolled through images that documented the entire ordeal: my mother's false cheerfulness, the moment she revealed her true intentions, her walking away as I screamed for help. The final image showed her car driving away, dust rising behind it while I lay collapsed beside my walker in the distance. Seeing the abandonment from this external perspective was surreal and devastating. It was real. It had happened. There was proof. "I can call for help right now," Jackson said, holding up the satellite phone. "But I want you to know that with these photos you have options, legal options. What she did was criminal neglect and endangerment." The idea that my mother might face consequences for her actions had never seemed possible before. She had always controlled the narrative, convinced me and everyone else that she was the devoted caretaker, the selfless martyr. "Call for help," I said finally. "Please." Jackson dialed emergency services, clearly explaining the situation and our exact location using GPS coordinates. He detailed my medical needs, emphasizing my mobility limitations and the overnight exposure I had endured. Help would come, but it would take at least 3 hours for rescuers to reach our remote location. While we waited, Jackson shared more about himself. His career transition from paramedic to wildlife photographer following a burnout period. His sister Maya, who had muscular dystrophy and used a power wheelchair. His small cabin near Boulder, where he processed his photographs and occasionally taught workshops. Bit by bit, I found myself trusting him. His medical background showed in how he monitored my condition, encouraging small sips of water, checking my pulse, and ensuring the thermal blanket trapped maximum body heat. "Why would she do this?" I asked suddenly, the question that had been torturing me since the moment my mother drove away. Jackson considered carefully before answering. "From what I observed and what you have told me, your mother appears to have a narcissistic personality. People like that see others, even their children, as extensions of themselves rather than autonomous individuals. When you sought independence, it threatened her sense of control and identity as the martyred caretaker." His analysis aligned with thoughts I had harbored but never fully articulated. My mother had needed me to be simultaneously burdensome and grateful, dependent and appreciative. My attempts at self-sufficiency had threatened the identity she had built around being my caretaker. "That does not make it okay," Jackson added firmly. "Nothing justifies what she did. This was calculated, premeditated abandonment of a vulnerable person. She intended harm." As we talked, I felt strength returning to my body and clarity to my mind. The emergency helicopter arrived just after noon, forest rangers and a medical team rappelling down into the clearing. They assessed my condition, treated me for mild hypothermia and dehydration, and carefully secured me for transport. Before I was lifted into the helicopter, I turned to Jackson. "Thank you for watching, for waiting, for helping." He nodded, understanding the complexity of my gratitude. "I will bring the photographic evidence to the police station, and if you need a witness later, I will be there." As the helicopter rose above the trees, I caught a final glimpse of Jackson, standing in the clearing beside my abandoned walker, camera in hand, still watching over me as I began the journey toward rescue and recovery. The helicopter ride to the nearest hospital was a blur of noise, wind, and medical intervention. A paramedic named Sarah monitored my vitals, inserted an IV to address my dehydration, and wrapped additional thermal blankets around my legs. I tried to explain my condition, the partial paralysis and nerve damage, but my voice was hoarse from screaming and the night in the cold. "We know," Sarah assured me, checking the IV flow. "Your friend Jackson explained everything to dispatch. We have your medical needs covered." Friend. The word struck me as both strange and comforting. Less than 24 hours ago, Jackson had been a complete stranger. Now he was advocating for me, documenting evidence, ensuring my safety. In the span of one day, my mother had become my would-be killer, and a random wildlife photographer had become my lifeline. We landed at a regional medical center about 80 miles from where I had been abandoned. The transition from helicopter to emergency department was smooth and efficient. A team was waiting for me, alerted to both my immediate condition and my underlying disability. Aria Mitchell, a doctor with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, approached my gurney. "I am Dr. Hernandez. We are going to take good care of you." The next several hours were consumed by medical procedures and examinations. X-rays confirmed no new injuries from my night in the woods. Blood tests showed electrolyte imbalances from dehydration and stress. My body temperature was still below normal, and some mild frostbite affected my fingertips. Most concerning to the medical team was the state of my legs, where the cold and unusual positioning had aggravated my chronic nerve pain. While I was being treated, police officers arrived to take my initial statement. Detective Lisa Warren, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor but compassionate eyes, sat beside my hospital bed with a notepad. "I know this is difficult," she began, "but I need you to tell me exactly what happened." I recounted everything from my mother's sudden suggestion of a healing retreat to her final words before abandonment. Detective Warren took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing, exact locations, and my mother's demeanor. "Has your mother ever threatened or harmed you before?" she asked. The question made me pause. Had she? There had been emotional abuse, manipulation, isolation. There had been threats of abandonment, but had I considered it harm at the time? She controlled everything I said slowly. My benefits, my medical care, my social life. She sabotaged every attempt I made at independence. She told me I could not survive without her. Detective Warren nodded her expression, suggesting she had heard similar stories before. "And then she put you in a position to prove her right." "Yes," I whispered. "Exactly." "We have officers looking for her now," the detective assured me. "Based on your statement and the evidence from Mr. Reed, we have enough for an arrest warrant." The evidence from Jackson had already been delivered to the police station. His photographs provided time-stamped, geotagged proof of the abandonment, making my case unusually well documented for a crime that typically happened without witnesses. After Detective Warren left, a hospital social worker named Marcus came to discuss my immediate needs. Where would I go after discharge? Did I have family or friends who could support me? What resources did I need? The questions overwhelmed me. I had lived with my mother my entire life. Our house was the only home I had known. My benefits went directly to accounts she controlled. The few friends I had were online connections, none local enough to offer immediate help. "I have nowhere to go," I admitted the reality, crushing me anew. She made sure of that. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "There are options. Emergency housing vouchers for people with disabilities, transitional living programs. It won't be permanent, but it will give you time to sort things out." While we discussed possibilities, a nurse entered with news that I had a visitor. Jackson had arrived at the hospital after giving his statement to the police. "Is it okay if he comes in?" the nurse asked. I nodded, surprising myself with how much I wanted to see him. Jackson entered cautiously, carrying a small duffel bag and wearing clean clothes different from his outdoor gear. "I checked into a motel nearby," he explained. "I wanted to make sure you were okay and see if you needed anything." The simple kindness almost broke me. After years of my mother's conditional care, having someone show concern without expectation felt foreign and overwhelming. "They are keeping me overnight," I told him, "for observation and to get my pain management under control." Jackson nodded, setting the duffel bag on a chair. "I brought something that might help. The police let me take your walker from the scene after they documented everything. It is at my motel room. I figured you would need it." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched me deeply. The walker was specially adjusted to my height and needs. Replacing it would have been expensive and time-consuming. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the gratitude I felt. Jackson stayed for about an hour, filling me in on developments outside the hospital. Local news had picked up the story of a woman abandoned in the woods, though they had not released names yet. Search efforts for my mother had expanded to neighboring states based on credit card transactions showing she had crossed into Utah. The reality of public exposure hit me suddenly. People will know. Everyone will know what happened to me. "Only what you want them to know," Jackson assured me. "You control your story, Aria. Not her, not the media." His words resonated deeply. For years, my mother had controlled the narrative about my life, my disability, our relationship. Perhaps it was time for my truth to be heard. The next morning, Dr. Hernandez cleared me for discharge with prescriptions for pain medication and follow-up appointments scheduled. Marcus, the social worker, had arranged emergency accessible housing at a residence hotel that partnered with the hospital for patient transitions. It is covered for 2 weeks, he explained, providing a folder of information. That should give us time to connect you with longer-term options and start the process of regaining control of your benefits. As I prepared to leave, Detective Warren returned with an update. My mother had been located attempting to check into a motel near the Nevada border. She had been arrested without incident and was being transported back to Colorado to face charges of criminal neglect, reckless endangerment, and exploitation of an at-risk adult. She is claiming it was all a misunderstanding, Detective Warren said, her tone making it clear she did not believe this for a second. Says she just went to get help and got lost. The photos Mr. State is, F. Warren, said Vertu. Reed took make that defense pretty implausible. I felt strangely hollow at the news. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness where my relationship with my mother had been. Will I have to see her? I asked. In court or anything? Eventually, yes, if the case goes to trial. But that is a ways off, and we will prepare you thoroughly if it comes to that. Jackson had offered to drive me to the residence hotel. As a hospital volunteer helped me into his SUV, I caught a glimpse of a news van parked across the street. They have been there all morning, Jackson said, noticing my gaze. I can take the back exit if you prefer. I considered for a moment, then shook my head. Number. Let us go out the front. I am not hiding anymore. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt significant. For years, my mother had kept me isolated, hidden away, except when my presence served her narrative. Walking out the front door, visible to the world despite what had been done to me, was my first step toward reclaiming my story. The media attention intensified over the following days. Local news coverage expanded to national interest. As the details emerged, a mother abandoning her disabled daughter in the wilderness, a wildlife photographer capturing the entire event, the survival and rescue. It was the kind of story that captured public attention, equal parts horrifying and captivating. I declined all interview requests at first, focusing instead on the immediate tasks of recovery and establishing my new life. But I watched from a distance as my mother's carefully constructed image crumbled. Former coworkers came forward with stories of her complaints about caring for me, of sympathy she had collected under false pretenses. Neighbors described how she had isolated me, controlled visitors, prevented friendships. The truth was finally coming to light, and though exposure was uncomfortable, there was power in no longer living within her lies. The residence hotel became my first taste of independent living. The accessible unit had a bedroom, small kitchen, and bathroom modified for mobility needs. The freedom to decide when to eat, sleep, or shower without negotiation or guilt was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jackson visited daily at first, helping me navigate practical matters like grocery delivery, pharmacy connections, and transportation options. His sister Maya FaceTimed with us, offering advice on disability resources and adaptive equipment that might make my independence easier. You need a better chair for the shower, she insisted during one call. The one they provided looks like it belongs in a hospital. There are much better options. This casual conversation about adaptive equipment without shame or burden was refreshing. Maya talked about her disability as a practical reality, not a tragic condition or point of martyrdom. She recommended online communities, advocacy groups, and local resources I had never known existed. A week after my rescue, Detective Warren called with an update on the investigation. The police had searched my mother's computer, discovering emails and search history that proved premeditation. She researched wilderness areas with no cell service, and how long does it take to die from exposure, Detective Warren told me, her voice gentle but direct. She also looked into selling your medical equipment before she even took you to the woods. The cold calculation was staggering. My mother had not abandoned me in a moment of frustration or breakdown. She had planned my death, meticulously researching the most effective way to ensure I would not survive and could not call for help. The district attorney is adding attempted murder to the charges, Detective Warren continued. With the evidence we have, your mother is facing significant prison time. That same day, a social worker from Adult Protective Services helped me begin the process of regaining control of my finances. My disability benefits had been deposited into an account with both our names, but my mother had been the sole person with access. We discovered she had withdrawn nearly all the funds before abandoning me. We can file for emergency replacement benefits, the social worker explained, and there are victim compensation funds available while the legal case proceeds. Piece by piece, I began reconstructing a life. Jackson connected me with a friend who worked at a digital marketing firm that specialized in accessibility consulting. Given my online degree and personal experience navigating the world with a disability, I was qualified for entry-level remote work, evaluating websites and apps for accessibility compliance. My first paycheck, deposited directly into an account only I controlled, represented a freedom I had never known. Small decisions became powerful acts of self-determination. I could order takeout without justification, buy clothes that expressed my style rather than my mother's preferences, schedule medical appointments that addressed my actual needs rather than maintaining a narrative of constant crisis. The temporary housing at the residence hotel was extended through a program for crime victims, giving me time to save for a more permanent solution. Jackson helped me search online listings for accessible apartments, driving me to view potential places when virtual tours did not adequately show the features I needed to assess. "This one has a zero-threshold entrance," he pointed out during one viewing. "And look at the width of these doorways. Your walker would have plenty of clearance." His knowledge about accessibility reflected years of navigating the world with his sister. He noticed details I might have missed: counter heights, outlet placements, bathroom layouts that would work with mobility aids. 2 months after the abandonment, I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a building with elevator access and modified features. It was small but perfectly suited to my needs, with rent I could afford through my new job and properly managed benefits. Moving day was bittersweet. The few possessions I had were items Jackson had retrieved from my mother's house after police finished processing it as a crime scene. My clothes, my laptop, some books, and personal mementos. Everything else I was starting fresh. "It is strange," I told Jackson as we arranged furniture in my new living room. "I lived in that house my entire life, but almost nothing in it feels like mine to reclaim." "You get to decide what you want to keep from your past," he said thoughtfully, "and what you want to leave behind." As my physical situation stabilized, I began addressing the emotional aftermath with a therapist specializing in trauma and family abuse. Dr. Linney helped me understand the dynamics that had defined my relationship with my mother: the narcissistic control, the manufactured dependence, the systematic isolation. "What you experienced was a lifetime of psychological abuse, culminating in a violent physical abandonment," she explained during one session. "Your mother created conditions where you would believe you could not survive without her, then put you in a situation designed to prove that belief correct. Understanding the patterns helped, but the pain remained raw. Nightmares of being alone in the dark woods plagued my sleep. Unexpected sounds triggered panic attacks. Trust came haltingly with frequent setbacks. Through therapy, I also connected with a support group for adult survivors of parental abuse. The stories shared in that safe space helped me realize I was not alone, that my experiences, while extreme in their conclusion, followed patterns familiar to others who had survived narcissistic parents. Regina's case moved slowly through the legal system. 6 months after the abandonment, a preliminary hearing was scheduled where I would need to testify. Preparing for this confrontation consumed me with anxiety. "She will be in the courtroom," I asked the victim advocate assigned to my case. "Yes, but you will not have to speak directly to her. You will address your answers to the judge and attorneys." Jackson offered to accompany me to court, as did Maya, who had traveled from Boulder to support me. Having them beside me as I entered the courtroom gave me strength I might not have found alone. And then there she was, my mother, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual carefully coordinated outfits. Her hair, normally perfectly styled, looked flat and dull. Our eyes met briefly before I took my seat at the witness stand. The prosecutor guided me through my testimony gently but thoroughly. I described my life under my mother's control, the events leading to the abandonment, and the abandonment itself in careful detail. Throughout, I avoided looking directly at Regina, focusing instead on the judge, the prosecutor, or the supportive faces of Jackson and Maya. When it was the defense attorney's turn for cross-examination, the tone shifted dramatically. "Is it not true that you had been demanding more independence?" he asked. "Yes, I wanted age-appropriate independence." "And your mother provided for all your needs for years, did she not?" "She controlled all aspects of my life, while presenting herself as a martyr for basic parental responsibility." Isn't it possible she simply went to get help and got lost or confused? At this, I finally looked directly at my mother. The photographs show her throwing my phone into the brush. Her computer searches show she researched how long it would take me to die from exposure. She told me I was dead to her and drove away. None of that is consistent with getting help. Regina's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. Not remorse, but annoyance at being exposed, at losing control of the narrative. The judge ruled there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. As Regina was led away by court officers, she turned toward me. "I gave you everything," she said loud enough for the courtroom to hear. "This is how you repay me." The victim advocate quickly moved between us, blocking her from view. But those words, so consistent with the manipulation I had endured my entire life, confirmed what I already knew. My mother felt no remorse. In her mind, she remained the victim. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered hungry for statements about the case that had captured public attention. With Jackson and Maya flanking me supportively, I faced the cameras for the first time. "I survived because someone was watching," I said simply. Both literally in the case of the photographer who documented my abandonment and figuratively in the form of everyone who has supported me since. No one should have to live in isolation and fear because of a disability. No one should have to earn the right to basic dignity and care. The statement was brief but powerful. For the first time, I was controlling my own story, not allowing my mother or anyone else to define my narrative. As we left the courthouse, Maya squeezed my hand. "You did great in there. How are you feeling?" The question was simple but profound. For years, no one had asked how I felt without an agenda behind the question. My mother had only wanted answers that confirmed her narrative of burden and sacrifice. I searched for the right word. Free. 1 year after the abandonment, Regina Mitchell was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder, criminal neglect, and exploitation of an at-risk adult. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Jackson's photographs, her computer searches, her financial maneuvers before the abandonment, and my testimony. I attended the sentencing hearing, my final opportunity to address the court and my mother directly through a victim impact statement. I had worked on this statement for weeks with my therapist, trying to articulate the lifetime of emotional abuse that had preceded the physical abandonment. The woman who left me in those woods to die was not just my mother in a moment of breakdown, I told the silent courtroom. She was the same person who systematically isolated me from friends, sabotaged my attempts at independence, and convinced me I was a burden rather than a person with inherent value. I described the specific incidents: the unplugged wheelchair charger before a planned outing with friends, the mysteriously failed internet during job interviews, the controlled access to my own benefits and medical care. The attempted murder in the woods was simply the culmination of years of psychological violence, I continued. My crime in her eyes was seeking the basic dignity and independence that every human deserves. For that, she determined I should die alone and helpless. Throughout my statement, Regina stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, she offered no apology, only a rehearsed statement about the stresses and burdens of caring for a disabled child without adequate support. Even in her final opportunity for accountability, she portrayed herself as the victim. The judge was not persuaded. "Miss Mitchell, the evidence shows you methodically planned to end your daughter's life," he said before announcing the sentence. "You calculated her vulnerability and exploited it in the cruelest possible way. The court finds no mitigating factors that would justify leniency." As Regina was led away by court officers, she looked at me one final time. I expected hatred, perhaps a final verbal attack. Instead, I saw something more disturbing: complete indifference, as if I were a stranger whose fate meant nothing to her. In that moment, I understood that my mother had never truly seen me as a person separate from herself. I had been a prop in her narrative, useful only as long as I played my assigned role. When I began asserting independence, I became disposable. The realization was painful but clarifying. I could not change her, could not make her feel remorse she was incapable of experiencing. But I could choose how her actions would affect my future. After the sentencing, I declined media interviews, preferring to process this chapter's closing privately. Jackson, who had remained a constant support throughout the legal proceedings, drove me home to my apartment. "How do you feel?" he asked as we sat in my small but comfortable living room. Like I can finally stop looking backward, I replied. Like I can focus on building rather than surviving. The year since my rescue had been transformative, in ways both practical and profound. My part-time consulting work had evolved into a full-time position with benefits. I had become skilled at navigating public transportation with my mobility aids, expanding my world beyond what my mother had allowed me to believe possible. My apartment felt truly mine, now decorated according to my preferences, arranged for my specific needs. Plants thrived on windowsills. Books I chose filled shelves. Adaptive equipment that balanced function and aesthetics made daily tasks manageable without institutional feelings. Most importantly, I had built connections. My support group for adult survivors of family abuse had become a crucial community. I had made friends through disability advocacy organizations, and my relationship with Jackson had evolved from rescuer and rescued to something more balanced and meaningful. Jackson's presence in my life had been a constant I never took for granted. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, but never treated me as helpless. He respected my independence while offering support when needed. Over months of coffee dates, movie nights, and deep conversations, romantic feelings had developed naturally between us. "I have something I want to show you," he said now, pulling out his laptop. "Remember I mentioned that photography project about resilience I have been working on? The gallery accepted it for an exhibition next month." He opened a folder of images, starting with black and white photographs of various people, each paired with a color image, showing the same person in a moment of triumph or joy. There were cancer survivors, refugees, veterans with prosthetic limbs, all captured first in vulnerability, then in strength. The final pairing in the collection took my breath away. The black and white image showed me in the forest clearing collapsed beside my walker after my mother's abandonment. The color counterpart showed me at my desk, working confidently surrounded by the life I had built for myself. "Is this okay?" Jackson asked, watching my reaction carefully. "I would never display it without your permission, and I can remove it entirely if you prefer." I studied the images, seeing not just my personal journey, but a universal story of human resilience. "It is more than okay," I said finally, "but I want to be there at the opening. I want to stand beside these images and own my story completely." Jackson smiled, relief and pride mingling in his expression. "I was hoping you would say that." 2 weeks later, I accompanied Jackson to a school where he had been invited to speak about wildlife photography. After his presentation, a student asked about his most memorable photographic experience. "That would be the day I witnessed and documented a crime while waiting to photograph eagles," he replied briefly, recounting my story without using names. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. "The person you helped, are they okay now?" Jackson glanced at me, seated at the back of the room. I gave a subtle nod. "Yes," he answered. "She is thriving. She works as an accessibility consultant, helping make digital spaces more inclusive for people with disabilities. She recently started a support group for others who have survived family abuse. And she taught me more about courage and resilience than I could learn in a lifetime of adventure photography." After the presentation, we walked through a nearby park, the autumn leaves, creating a tapestry of red and gold around us. The same season as my abandonment, but now transformed into something beautiful rather than threatening. "I want to go back," I said suddenly. Jackson stopped. "Back where?" "To the clearing. Where she left me. Where you found me. I want to see it again, but this time on my terms with proper preparation and support." He considered this carefully. "Are you sure? That place holds traumatic memories." "That is exactly why I need to reclaim it," I explained. "Right now, those woods exist in my mind as a place of abandonment and terror. I want to experience them as just woods, just nature, without the weight of what happened there." The following weekend, with meticulous planning, Jackson drove us back to the area of my abandonment. We brought proper equipment this time. An all-terrain wheelchair for navigating the uneven ground, warm clothing, water, and communication devices. Maya joined us along with 2 friends from my support group who understood the significance of this journey. The drive into the mountains felt dramatically different from a year earlier. Where there had been confusion and growing dread, now there was purpose and community. We parked at the same overlook, but this time I surveyed the landscape with clear eyes, seeing both its dangers and its beauty. Using the all-terrain chair, I was able to navigate to the clearing with Jackson's occasional assistance. When we reached the spot where my mother had left me, I asked everyone to give me a few minutes alone. Sitting there surrounded by pine trees and dappled sunlight, I closed my eyes and acknowledged all that had happened: the abandonment, the terror, the rescue, the recovery, the justice, the rebuilding. When I opened my eyes again, the clearing had transformed in my perception. It was no longer the site of my intended death, but the birthplace of my true life. This was where I had been left to die, yes, but also where I had been found, where my journey to genuine independence had begun. I motioned for the others to rejoin me. Together, we shared a picnic lunch in the clearing, filling the space with conversation and laughter. We took photographs, creating new memories to overlay the traumatic ones. And before leaving, we gathered stones to build a small cairn, a marker of survival rather than victimhood. Back in the city, life continued to evolve in ways I once couldn't have imagined. My support group expanded, connecting adults who had survived parental abuse across physical and digital spaces. My work as an accessibility consultant grew to include speaking engagements at conferences and consulting with major companies. My relationship with Jackson deepened, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than caretaking dynamics. He understood my need for independence, never hovering or assuming incapacity, while I valued his perspective as someone who had witnessed both my most vulnerable moment and my greatest strengths. On the anniversary of my rescue, we hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Maya was there, along with friends from my support group, colleagues from work, and neighbors who had become important parts of my community. Looking around at these people who knew my full story and valued me completely, I realized I had created something my mother never could: a genuine family built on mutual care rather than obligation or control. Later that evening, after our guests had left, Jackson and I sat on my small balcony watching the city lights. "I have been thinking about family," I told him, "about how we define it, choose it, build it." He nodded, understanding as always. Family should be the people who see you clearly and love what they see. Exactly. For years, I believed I was unlovable because the person who should have loved me most couldn't see me at all. She only saw herself reflected in me, distorted by her own needs and failures. Jackson took my hand, his touch gentle. "I see you, Arya. I have from the first moment, even before we met. Through my camera lens, I saw someone fighting to survive against impossible odds. Then I got to know the woman behind that strength, with all your complexity and courage. The life I had built was not perfect. I still faced physical challenges daily. Nightmares sometimes disrupted my sleep. Certain triggers could still unleash memories of abandonment and fear. But these were obstacles to navigate, not defining limitations. What my mother never understood, what she could never accept, was that my disability was simply one aspect of my humanity, neither a tragedy to mourn nor a burden to resent. In abandoning me, she had intended to confirm my helplessness. Instead, she had inadvertently set me free to discover my own capacity for resilience, joy, and connection. The most profound lesson I learned through all of this was that true strength isn't found in perfect independence or complete self-sufficiency. It exists in the courage to be vulnerable, to accept help without shame, to build interdependent relationships based on mutual respect rather than control or obligation. One person had watched me being abandoned, documenting my mother's cruelty with his camera. But many people had watched me rebuild, supporting my journey without trying to control its direction. The difference between these two kinds of watching, between surveillance and witness, had transformed my understanding of what it means to be seen. I am no longer the woman my mother abandoned in the woods, though that experience will always be part of my story. I am the woman who survived, who rebuilt, who reclaimed her narrative. And that woman knows that while we cannot choose all the circumstances of our lives, we can choose how we respond to them, who we allow close to us, and what meaning we create from even our most painful experiences. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone you trusted betrayed you? How did you find the strength to start over? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible, that abandonment is not the end of the story. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our moments of greatest vulnerability.